This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL Coveel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. The interesting thing about investing is that without the mental side, without the psychology side, your mental mind map side, you're going to fail. That's why on this podcast, I love having on professors in the field of psychology. There's always a nugget to be gleaned, something to be learned from someone else's perspective in the field of the study of the mind. My guest today is Geoffrey Cohen, a professor at Stanford. His new book, Belonging: The Science of Creating Connection and Bridging Divides. Now that's a mouthful. That's a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration for a big, big problem. Maybe that problem can never be solved. Maybe we can make a dent in it. Maybe it can be solved. I guess there always is the hopeful, optimistic side of me, but sometimes there's also the pragmatic, pessimistic side. But I can guarantee this, and I know my guest today will also guarantee this, without belonging, your life is going to be subpar. Without any further delay from me, let's jump right in with my guest today, Geoffrey Cohen, and talk belonging. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. This word belonging, another episode I had, I was talking with someone and they said to me, after listening to me, it almost was a role reversal. They said, well, Mike, it feels like you've found belonging. It's not a word you necessarily hear a lot. Why do I let you, from a jumping in standpoint, jump off with the word belonging and let people understand why it's so important to you? Because as a keen observer of people, often when I see people that seem to be struggling or they don't really have their thing, it seems so clear to me they don't have belonging. They don't belong to a group or a something. They just don't have it. It really seems like this is one of the roots of the modern dilemma where people just are having a hard time, and it's a lack of belonging.
You put that so well. I agree with so many things that you said, in particular, that sense you get when you feel at home. It sounds like you had that in Vietnam. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to find that place where you really feel a sense of home, which is less of a sort of physical entity and more of a psychological experience. And that feeling of belonging turns out to be one of the yearnings we have as human beings. We're evolved to be social species. We are social species. We're kind of helpless out there in the physical world on our own. We really do need other people to survive. Down to our DNA, it's encoded in us to seek connection. It is a basic human impulse to create connection, to maintain connection. It's central to who we are as a species. But in addition, because it's so central to who we are as a species, it's really, really, really important for our well-being, our psychological health, our ability to think clearly and critically. As you're suggesting, there's many people now who feel disconnected from the rest of humanity. The opposite of belonging is loneliness. Loneliness doesn't really capture just how awful that experience it is. It is really that sense of being cut off from the rest of humanity. And it is so isolating. And my friend Steve Cole over at UCLA Medical School, he's an immunologist. He says, this is probably one of the worst environmental toxins out there. Loneliness, isolation, so is psychological isolation. We understand the importance of these environmental toxins such as radon or cigarette smoke, but we have much less of an appreciation of these psychological toxins in our situation. Loneliness is way up there. I think you're right that it's an important craving. When we do find that sense of home, it's like, wow, where have I been? How come I haven't found it sooner? And when we don't have that sense of home, when we feel excluded, especially for a long period of time, it can be very, very hard.
Let me throw a thought out about technology. Technology going back to the advent of the TV, to then, let's say, cable TV, the internet, social media, it seems like all of these creations have allowed people to escape and have allowed people to avoid people. And this is just my theory here. Maybe they didn't know this was happening to them, but with the advent of TV, okay, I can just be a couch potato. Well, social media, I can be more of a couch potato. So much of many of these devices, while they're great in the abstract and we all love them and all that kind of stuff, but it does seem like they've been right at the nexus of a lack of human connection. Whereas we didn't have all these devices, we might just one day, if we're sitting on the couch and we're like, okay, this is really boring, I need to go talk to somebody. It seems like the devices have in many ways connected us, yet pushed us away.
I think part of this moment that we're in, which Pete Buttigieg calls a crisis of belonging, he characterizes a lot of the problems that we have in our modern society, economic, social, as a crisis of belonging. I think that there's probably a perfect storm of variables. I think social media and the media have a big role to play. The media, for one, is incentivized to stir up fear and outrage, which is just antithetical to any sense of community. We're to blame for this as psychologists. We showed that fear, outrage, and disgust command people's attention.
America tuned into the Jerry Springer show, and then it was all over.
That was the fork in the road. It's like catnip for our minds. The media has exploited that. And for that reason, there's all these findings out there just showing, I know you have an interest in human irrationality, that's showing that, for instance, as the world got safer after 2000, the number of violent crimes, the number of property crimes fell. Nevertheless, people for the first 18 years since 2000 felt like crime was rising. And that's because of the media. Those are the things that command people's attention: fear, loathing, disgust. As a result of that, it becomes hard to trust other people, especially when you think other people are out there to do harm. Then social media, as you're right, I think it's probably unfair to blame it all on social media, but I do think social media is kind of a catalyst for some of the harsh forces in our culture that are isolating us from one another. The desire to be popular, the desire to get lots of likes, all these things find fertile soil in social media. As research shows, those aren't the things that make us feel connected. Those aren't the things that make us feel happy. It's connection, not status, not popularity. It's legitimate connection. And the problem with social media is that, first, it focuses people on the performative aspect of social relationships rather than having an authentic or deep connection with other people. It's more about, am I liked? How do I seem? Do people approve of me? That's not a healthy way to get connection or a sense of belonging. Of course, as we know, social media is also a force to divide us. Ironically, I know Mark Zuckerberg said he got into this in order to bring people together, but it really does seem as though, ironically, I don't even think he anticipated this. It's really dividing us, politically especially. The political fault line is like a chasm now. I do think that social media is partly to blame, and the algorithms that feed us a slanted picture of the world, the sort of mass mentality that arises on these social media platforms. I think you're right. It's a perfect storm of media, social media, probably the increasing individualism and isolation of society as well, combine to create a crisis of belonging.
Let me take it back in time a little bit. Let me think of, and this is before my time, but I know something about it. We have an election in 1960, Nixon and Kennedy. These were very different people. It was a different choice. It was a close election, very close election. That's a few years ago. But the part that I keep thinking about, especially as a Gen X guy spending a decade in a place like Vietnam, which is just, let's face it, for someone like yourself and many of your peers, immediately it's like, God, I want to go down that rabbit hole and find out why that guy made those choices, because that's probably an interesting story. And it is. But it's like, there's always been groups. There's always been groups. There's always been divides. For me, being in a homogenous Asian country where I don't speak the language, to find belonging in something like that. And I've got some American friends here, and we'll talk about this. What are these things that we are drawn to in a homogenous Asian culture? And one of the things is the lack of divide. It's almost like sometimes you're dealing with, okay, those 10 ladies all seem like sisters and they're unrelated. That's one of the things that I've really started to enjoy. I wonder your perspective on this. I lay out the Kennedy and Nixon thing. We're always going to have this divide in America. We're always going to have these divisions. There's always going to be people that have strongly thought out visions that are unrelated to the other side, so to speak. I sometimes wonder, are we being a little too hopeful that these divides would ever go away? Because they're root level, they're existential divides for many people.
That's a really interesting story. Two things I would say in response to that. One is, unlike Vietnam and a lot of other countries, the United States of America is incredibly unique as the most diverse society on the planet ever. So the challenges that we have as a society are so much harder, at least on this dimension, than they are in other cultures. And I do feel as though that is an opportunity. This is kind of a uniquely American skill set to interact across difference and to bring out the best in diversity. And diversity, as we know, is a huge engine for innovation. It probably has a lot to do with the technological inventions of our culture, the dynamism of our art, our popular culture. So much comes out of the fact that we're such a diverse society. So there are huge benefits to that. What we need is a methodology for bringing out the good things and avoiding some of the bad things that occur in many situations where people are interacting across lines of difference. That's one thing. We need a skill set. And I would say that that skill set involves shaping situations in more constructive ways.
What would be some specifics there? Because you said something about crime. I was in San Francisco in 1999. I walked the city by myself. I loved it. It was amazing. I took a Vietnamese friend back there in 2016. I was walking the streets with her. I figured, well, a similar experience than 15 years ago. I was aghast. Something had changed. I concur with your big picture macro perspective that yes, we got to find a way. But once you kind of take the big picture macro off and you get down to the nitty gritty, there's some obvious truths that aren't pretty that we're not dealing with. And I just bring up one thing with the crime and maybe some of the inner city issues going on in America. There's all kinds of issues going on, but that's just one.
As a social psychologist, and in this book that I wrote, it's not really a call for system change. And I do think we're in a cultural moment where reforms to policies, institutions are needed, to laws. What the book is really about is what we can do day to day, down on the ground, in our own individual lives to make things go a little bit better, sometimes a lot better. While we all push the cultural ball forward to try to bring about a more equitable system, which I completely feel is, given my orientation, I do believe in that making the game fairer for everyone, creating opportunity for everyone is a key mission. But that shouldn't detract from the fact that every day down on the ground, there are little things that we can do. Even though we're heavily fractured, there are small things we can do to make these interpersonal interactions go better. One thing I've already done with you here in this interview is to qualify my points of view using the two words, I think. In some research that I've done with my graduate student, Michael Schwabe, we've looked at ways in which political actors can communicate better with one another. And one of the powerful things we can do is just change the language that we use with one another. Instead of stating our opinions as facts, like instead of saying Clinton is better than Trump, saying, I think from my point of view, Clinton is better than Trump. And using these subjective caveats, I know it seems minor, has major effects on our relationships with people across the political divide. In this case, we found that people were less likely to villainize people from the other side. Clinton supporters were less likely to villainize Trump supporters and vice versa. And they were more curious about learning more about the other side when they engaged in a way in which they expressed themselves using these subjective qualifiers. In my field, social psychology, we find that these little things can sometimes, under the right circumstances, have big effects. So I would say that, yes, you're right, the problems can seem formidable, and there are some really difficult problems to overcome. Yet, as individuals, we can have more impact on the situation than we think. And that can sometimes create a virtuous cycle in which we change the outcome of a relationship, change the outcome of someone we're dealing with. And if we all do this a little bit, I really believe that our world could be a lot better. It doesn't take much. A little bit compounded across a lot of people is a big outcome.
The I think example with politics is a great one. I can think back to my youth in the 80s, and I can look at national political campaigns. Okay, people might have had differences of opinion, and they voted for Reagan, or they voted for Mondale, or they voted for Bush, or they voted for Gore. But it wasn't the other side is an evil monster and the world is going to end if the other side wins. It was more of like, okay, this is my choice, but we can still maybe go to the cafe and have coffee or something. It didn't become such a divide where today, and I feel for young people because they don't really have one foot on the other side where they can remember perhaps that things weren't just so volatile. Whereas young people today, once they're on a side, they're stuck and the other side is evil. I do like the I think part.
One of the things I'm very interested in is just how our everyday situations are being manipulated by other people, other powers. And I know you have an interest in the ways in which the media can present a biased picture of reality.
Hold on, it's not can. It's not can. You know it's not can. It is.
Yes, I agree. It's very hard to get good news.
But when you said can, were you using that to be a little less dogmatic?
Yes. I think it begins the conversation in this way to kind of meet people halfway and to kind of see what kinds of common ground we have. I would, of course, say that if you have convictions and strong convictions, and it's a moment where they really, really matter to be expressed dogmatically and firmly, yeah, of course. But right here, we're having conversation. We're turning over this issue. I think what we're trying to do is explore this topic. And what the media does, in addition to presenting a slanted view of reality, is it does the job of villainizing. Both sides, right and left, villainize one another. Yeah, one side may do it more than the other. And of course, there's going to be biased perceptions of bias, too. That's a real phenomenon. I think the media has a big role to play in stoking these resentments, even just watching any news program where they're talking about Republicans and Democrats. Those Republicans, those Democrats are ignorant, are motivated by greed. Talking in those, what social psychologists call essentialist ways, this whole group is like that, is like kindling for political resentment. I think the media plays some role in this. And that's one of the things that I'm really interested in is the ways in which our situations are being molded by forces that we don't understand. Another is just segregation. I mean, we're just much more segregated from people, especially on the coasts and in the Midwest, Midwestern states. We're much more segregated politically from people across the political aisle than we used to. I think the figure is for 170 million voters in America, roughly 1 in 10 of their daily interactions are with someone in the political outgroup. So if you don't know people, you end up having less empathy for them, what James Baldwin called poverty of empathy.
What's interesting about that perspective, and again, I use my example of being in Vietnam, is that in some ways, the average person, left or right in America, they're just leading their lives. Most people, they're not taking a deep professorial dive. They're just living their life, doing their thing. And I sometimes wonder, especially, okay, if I think of Europe or I think of Asia, where all these little European countries, I'm 50% Lithuanian, this tiny little country that is so ethnic nationalism. Europe is like that. So America is definitely a very different place. But I sometimes wonder, to play devil's advocate with you, is it even realistic to get all of these diverse groups to somewhat hold hands?
Is it even realistic to get some of these diverse groups to hold hands? I think we have to.
I could tell from you, you don't want to hear that. It sounds defeatist.
Yeah, it sounds defeatist.
It sounds like, well, that's not progress. But then I look around the world as a keen observer of other nation states, and homogeneity does seem to be the rule, except for America. And America is the one with all the strife.
Yeah, but you got to have hope, I think. I mean, I don't know. Let's play with this. There are so many cases in American history where people from seemingly different groups came together in common cause. World War II, Civil Rights era, at least in the early stages of the Civil Rights era, there were people from all ethnic groups working together for a common cause, whites with blacks, the beloved community, people together trying to create a truly decent society. It's a beautiful thing when that happens. I'm very interested in how you create that magic. All I'm doing is providing a set of strategies for creating that magic. These are tools that could be useful. I really believe social science should be useful. That's why I went into this. I want it to be useful rather than simply describe problems and figure out what caused them. I wanted to, in addition to understand what caused them, try to intervene to make them better. My whole shtick here is about the little things we can do to shape situations to make that magic more likely. There's a suite of them. And one of the things that I think is lacking out there in the culture, one of the reasons I wrote this book is to get this work out there into the hands of people who could benefit, which is just about anyone who really wants to make their encounters go a bit better, especially the fraught encounters.
I'm going to keep it at you for a second. I'll share something about my perspective in doing this podcast for so long, hundreds and hundreds of interviews, many with professors. I find the type of individual that I like to talk to on this podcast is, number one, an accomplished professor who's really taken their niche and gone down that path, or some entrepreneur that really found some obscene success and has got some fantastic story. And then in my investment world, a lot of the traders also have these kinds of stories. When I look at your world, I think about someone like you. I'm like, well, how much belonging do you derive from the fact that you have this thing, this world, this topic, this career, that you wake up every day and you are energized? You are energized to dive into it. No one has to press a button. No one has to tell you what to do. You wake up and you are just on fire. Now, this is my theory, if most people in America could find a way to find that thing beyond just another individual, loving individuals, of course, we're all driven to that, but having that something in your life, that meaning in your life, that belonging in your life, that seems so critical. And it does seem like less and less people have that today. I wake up every day, I'm energized. I'm just like, okay, let's go attack it. What's new? What's exciting? Now, it's different topics for you and I, but you have the same spirit.
I do think, and the research supports this, that a sense of purpose is one of the best sources of belonging. Even Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, he writes about how he was on the brink of cardiovascular arrest in the concentration camps. And what kept him going, a famous psychiatrist, was writing down the notes for his book that he wanted to give to the world when he was out. He claims that that kept him alive. The research bears that out. If you could put a sense of purpose in a bottle, it would be $1 zillion industry. So if we could figure out how to do that, that would be one of the best things we could do for people's sense of belonging, as well as their health, because a sense of purpose, it turns out to be one of the big contributors to longevity and physical health. People who have a sense of purpose, I think, live on average 2 to 4 years longer, and they live lives that are more physically functional than people without a sense of purpose. There's some fascinating research out of UCLA Medical School by Steve Cole showing that when people have a sense of purpose, their genome actually responds a bit differently. It's less likely to be in this defensive state in which the pro-inflammatory genes, the genes that stimulate bodily inflammation, are turned on. When people have a sense of purpose, those genes are more likely to be turned off. So their bodies seem to have less of this biological poison in them because too much inflammation is actually really bad for health. So down to our DNA, we're actually responding to that sense that we have a sense of purpose, that we matter in the world. The world needs us. I can't yet leave the world. You even see some of the answers to what makes us happy and connected at the level of our DNA. The smallest bits of our humanity tell us about the biggest issues that we're concerned with as people. I think you're right. I think a sense of purpose is really important. And we could talk a little bit about how to make jobs and lives and schools have more of that sense of purpose, but I agree.
Your very ending point, we could talk about how maybe we could help other people to do it. There's always a side of me that's like, pull the bootstraps up and get to work routine. But for you, for example, there had to have been a moment or some type of intellectual stimulation where you said, wow, this feels good. I'm a curious guy. I want to solve problems. I want to get into this. I want to know. And I think a lot of young people today, and then you see it with adults, they kind of bypass that. They don't go down that path. And then I'm not saying something bad, but if I go back to the States and I see some friends and family, it's like grown adults in suspended animation of their teen years. Beyond, okay, maybe they have family and a job and stuff like that, but they don't have that thing that makes them wake up every day saying, the world needs me. That is so powerful. I'm in that situation. You can already tell I'm half-baked. And it's an amazing feeling. Hopefully I won't butcher his name. MICHAEL Coveel, the flow state. Then there's all the physical well-being feelings from having that sense of meaning. I know I'm going off on a lot of tangents, but you know where I'm coming from.
Absolutely. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I sure have. Things could be going very terribly in my life. I feel like the house is falling apart around me. But if I pick up a really good scientific article or book that I love, somehow things start to look not so bad. And I feel energized. And I think it's part of what you're describing. There's something in our minds that say, things are okay if you matter to the world. If you find something, I love that Joseph Campbell injunction, follow your bliss. When you feel that sense that something is bringing you joy, that's your body telling you, this is for you. This is what you were perhaps meant to be doing. It should be explored. And I do think that in our highly status-driven society, where each person, I feel, even in schools, is seen as just an economic unit in the larger system, I believe that the ability to sense that feeling of what impels me, what attracts me, what makes me curious is being lost. I do see that a little bit with some of the students, not all for sure, where it's as though people have been so, I wouldn't say programmed, but so focused on what other people think that they don't know what they think. I do think that that's, again, circling back to social media, one of the problems. At the same time, there's good news. There's little things we can do every day to recenter ourselves on the things that matter. One of the strategies that a lot of research in my own lab has looked at is what's known as the simple activity of values affirmations, which is just the simple activity of taking a moment to write about your most important values, the things that give you direction every day. It could be friends, it could be curiosity, it could be your art, but just recenter yourself. In a lot of studies, it's been shown that brief activity can be very powerful, at least under certain circumstances, helping people to deal with threatening health conditions, improving physical health symptoms, increasing persistence in school and at work. It is like tapping into this source of psychological energy to return to your values, what drives you. And I imagine that other things do that too, like religion, like spirituality, like a community where we feel like we have some role to play in its welfare.
Let me put a phrase out that some people will love, some people will hate. Life is not fair. I don't think life is fair. And I don't think life was designed to be fair. I don't think life can ever be fair. That expression has never bothered me, even as a young kid who wanted to play baseball and I was terrible and all that kind of stuff. But I practiced my rear end off. I got better at it. And I feel like my life has been a whole series of those ups and downs. Like I want to do something. Well, I'm not good enough to do it. I need to buckle down. I wonder, though, in the modern age where we have so much division, so many people are talking about inclusivity, which in the abstract is a great idea, but life isn't fair. It feels like to me, I guess that's my version of I think that if people accepted, and you're welcome to disagree or agree or add, but I think if people accepted that life is not fair, then it's easier to kind of go through life in a way. For example, I was asked to come speak at an event in another Asian country. The event was for a brokerage firm, and the brokerage firm wanted me to meet with and explain some of the subjects that I write about, some of these trading subjects, investing subjects, and explain them to the children of their highest net worth clients that are all going to be inheriting trusts. This is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. They want me to speak to these 25 kids who I was assuming are all going to inherit billions of dollars. Now, at that moment in time, you got to say to yourself, life is not fair. But then again, does it matter? What is your perspective when I bring that kind of a topic up?
Well, yes,
It causes you something. You're not necessarily sure you agree with my perspective.
You're bringing up some issues with my father, who would say the same thing. He would say the same thing. I would always think as a kid, life's unfair. And I would always think in the back of my mind, yeah, but shouldn't we be trying to make it more fair? Why not? I don't get it.
The key word you just said, though, was to try to make more fair. That's a key distinction.
We do have to live with unfairness and indignities and humiliations, some more than others. I'll just speak for myself. I'm one of the lucky ones. I have benefited from a system that has rewarded my effort and my privileges. I've ended up in a very good life situation, but there are other groups in our society for whom that correlation between effort and outcome can be very, very weak, frustratingly so. One of my favorite examples of this is a lovely little study where they sent out resumes to companies, I believe in 2 major cities throughout the US. Long story short, they manipulated the race of the name in the resume, whether it was a black sounding or white sounding name. And what they found was that the resumes with white names were more likely to receive a callback from the company than the resumes with black names. Evidence of discrimination, racial discrimination, exhibit 5038 that racism exists. At the same time, there was something else that often gets overlooked in the description of the study. The researchers also manipulated the credentials of the resume so that sometimes the resume contained a lot of on-the-job experience and sometimes only a little. What they found is that for the white applicant, credentials mattered. More credentials, more likely to get a callback. For the black applicants, credentials didn't matter nearly as much. In fact, a black candidate would have to have 8 years more on-the-job experience to be considered at the same level of white applicants. So we're talking about fairness. I'll just speak for myself. I've experienced unfairness, of course, but it seems pretty minor relative to that kind of treatment where I can work my ass off, get 8 years more on the job experience, and it just is like water off a duck's back. It's not even noticed. And that would be incredibly frustrating and incredibly threatening to people's sense of belonging, not just sense of belonging, but their well-being and opportunity. One of the best people on this is James Baldwin, who just writes so eloquently about it. He just describes how, as a black man in America, you are not completely free to just do what you want and be yourself. You have to be aware of the social reality that you could be subjected to great harm and great unfairness. And that reality is constraining. So I'm just saying, here I'm just in support of conversation to facilitate empathy and understanding in our diverse community, because I think it's very hard for us, especially people in positions of power, influence, and advantage, to fully understand the situations of people who do not have those things, I think.
I'm going to come back at you with an odd outside response to your examples, but I think you are right. You make a great point in the sense that you and I, for all we know, we could have very similar views. We could have very dissimilar views. But the reality is the type of conversation we're having right now is not normal. It's not normal in today's society. People are too threatened to have this conversation. And I feel one of my senses of belonging that I have is that I'm able to have so many diverse, smart people come on this podcast and let them have the feeling of like, okay, maybe I've got a little bit of a feel where Mike's coming from, but he lets me express myself. He gives me the forum. It's all on the table. And then that becomes a different type of conversation than it's just two fists punching each other, right?
That's right. A battle of wills.
Here's the side example that I want to bring up. This is partly from my living in Asia. And I've talked about this before, but if we look at America, and America has its racial strife, which is primarily stated in black-white. But, and you know this as a professor at fine institutions, if we allowed merit and grades to be the sole way that students got the top slots at the top universities, it'd be all Asian kids. It'd be all Asian kids. I mean, I've looked at the numbers. So then what do we do with that? I'm the type of guy that's like, you know what? If all of these Asian kids, they've got the best grades and they've got the best scores and the merit, and that means all the white and black kids don't have slots, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and some people are. Some people are kind of like a colorblind approach. Let the best rise to the top along this indicator of merit. I have only one question. What do we mean by merit?
Well, I mean, I guess over the years, whether it's an imperfect way to judge high quality candidates or not, we've had these certain measures that we've used, for example, for students that are applying to Harvard, I guess their grades, their SATs, the Asian kids, they've got to get much higher comparative scores than the white and black kids to get in. That part alone, I just imagine myself as not being such a learned person. And I'm just like a little kid on the playground hearing the story. I'm like, well, how come that little kid over there from China or Japan or Korea, how come they got such high scores and they couldn't get in? That doesn't seem fair. It's quite complicated stuff, isn't it?
And I'm only asking that question because, speaking from a pretty naive perspective here, I'm just being honest. I don't know if high school grades and SAT scores are really that good of an indicator of merit.
I would say they probably are not. I'm the quintessential bad student. Professor, if you looked at my grades, you'd say there's no reason this guy's been writing books and there's no reason he's having conversations with me. My grades are that bad.
Maybe if the education system had a broader, maybe more inclusive set of criteria beyond grades and test scores, and to some extent they do, but I don't know how much, then more people from different groups would be better represented in the universities. That could be accomplished through a broadened conception of what merit is. That's just one point. I'm just going to let that sit there because I think I have seen in my role as a professor too much emphasis placed on grades and test scores. Now, of course, I benefit from that. I got good grades after high school, not so much in high school, and I got pretty good test scores. But there is a feeling that I get that the people who now have those high grades and high test scores, not all of them, but many, are so handled and programmed that they don't know what they're doing in school. It goes back to the purpose point earlier. That would lead me to the question of, well, maybe we should start weighting the degree to which an individual has vision and purpose for what they want to do, as I'm sure you did. That might be part of what our conception of merit is. That's just one thing. The second thing is, I also wonder about what the purpose of these educational institutions like universities are. I think we have this feeling that they're supposed to be rewards for merit, but I actually look at it a little differently. Yeah, they are partly that to give a opportunity to the people who have worked for it, but they're also engines for a lot of good in society. They're engines for social mobility. Raj Chetty has some research suggesting that going to a good college can be a very powerful engine for low-income kids to make it to the middle class. They are engines for the diversification of America in leadership positions. The people who go to many of these schools become leaders of our community and our society. That's also a good that these institutions have. One other question beyond what do we mean by merit is merit the only game in town? I mean, I agree that merit's important, but also we need to consider how these universities serve a larger cultural and social purpose and the good that they can do for creating a great society. Not to use a Johnson term, probably not a good idea here, but to create a better society. I think that our discussion is a little myopic. That's why I appreciate this conversation. It's like, well, you kind of pick at the issue and there's some complexities there that I don't think we're going into in many of our vituperative dialogues.
Take, for example, you and I. Okay, we each got to where we are, the ability to have this conversation, dive into a topic in a different way. We got there in a different way, but we found this purpose. So generally people that have some purpose, if you throw a couple purpose people into the room, they're probably going to deliver something interesting that other people might want to listen to. But, and I think this gets to your point, if you take kids, young people, and they're told by parents, society, etc. Now, little Johnny, you just memorize this stuff. You memorize everything. You become a human computer. Context, purpose, all this kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. You just memorize it. And that's completely different than this idea that you and I have been talking about, belonging, because you might have all these young people that are chasing the quote grades, chasing the quote degree. Well, age 22, they're dumped back out of that cushy little system. They're back out of that system. And now what do they do? Because, and I think you will agree with this, do you really think most colleges, regardless of where that college is on the pecking order, kids aren't really learning purpose there? That's not really the point. The whole point is the memorization and the grades. That's the system that we have right now. And then the belonging, if it happens, is perhaps coming outside the system or after the first 4 years of a system. Some curiosity is piqued. For example, in your case, you went down a path and stayed in the academic world. But this is the interesting rub for me. It's where you've got the purpose pursuit over here, and the other side is like, well, if I do all these things, eventually I'll have the gold watch and everything will be perfect.
That's right. I'll make the million that I want to make. Two things. One is I agree that our schools, especially after elementary school, so this is middle school, high school, and to some degree colleges, though I think colleges do a pretty good job. I think that more attention to cultivating a sense of purpose and belonging for all would be a great mission for schools to take more seriously. Part of belonging is feeling like I have the potential to contribute to a larger mission that we all care about. It's purpose. It's that sense that I matter for some social purpose. And I think schools could do a much better job cultivating that sense of purpose in just so many ways. For instance, tapping into people's curiosity. There's not nearly enough wonder in the ways we teach science. What is going on when I look at the world and I have this conscious experience? How in the world is that working? Have you ever stopped to think about that? That is an amazing thing. I think education could do a much better job eliciting curiosity, making people aware of wonder, harnessing their hearts to a higher purpose. At the same time, I don't think it would take much. There's some nice studies just showing that actually teachers don't even think much of the time to just simply explain what's the purpose of this activity. Why am I doing this? You're doing it because I told you so, or it's part of the curriculum. With some research with David Yeager and others, we showed that when teachers simply explain how an activity can help the student move towards their purpose, which is often giving back to the world, turns out, if you ask a lot of teenagers in this study, or contributing to the community. If the teacher just simply explains why the activity serves a higher purpose, the kids are way more into it. I don't think it takes much. It's like a little bit of a blind spot. I think we underestimate the power of appealing to purpose. We think it's all about economics and incentives and material goods. And yeah, of course it is. And for some people, I think that that's really going to be very important, especially if you're trying to achieve social mobility for yourself and your family. In addition, though, love, purpose, that's the fuel, as you're saying. It keeps you going, keeps you in the game. I think schools could do some little things that would have big effects. Another thing I do with my students, I share my own stories. How did I get into this? What were my struggles? So that they see that it's a long, long process and you feel pretty demoralized at many points along the way. It's a journey.
And a side benefit, an important word in your work, if one can cultivate this sense of purpose, find that belonging, well, it's a really good way to mitigate loneliness.
That's right. Purpose, if you include it as a regression in predicting people's biological health, supersedes the effect of loneliness, meaning the effect of loneliness no longer matters once you put purpose into the regression equation. That's suggestive that it's a good antidote for loneliness. It's because you just feel connected to a larger mission. You're part of this larger legacy of people. I mean, I often feel like that when I'm maybe reading a book by Irving Goffman, for instance, the famous social sociologist. He's long dead, but I feel like I'm part of some continuing conversation that's going to go forward through time, beyond my time here. That gives me a sense of community, gives me a sense of belonging. I think purpose and belonging are really intertwined.
I saw a interview the other day with a young guy. I think he's in his mid-20s. His YouTube name is Mr. Beast. I was unaware of this guy. He's probably the most successful YouTuber, like 200 million subscribers. He does these just cute little fun videos. He'll give away money and go help folks that are in need and that kind of stuff. And he's making $1 million a day. It's something crazy. Again, the biggest YouTuber. He started at age 11 making videos. He had 3 or 4 friends at different parts in the world, and they were excited to create a video, find out how that video gets views, what attracts people to a video, what's a good video, this whole process. And they did this for years and years and years, making no money. And then finally, 5 or 6 years into it, he said he's making $1 a day. He kept pursuing and pursuing and pursuing. And now he's in this situation where it's just one of the most fantastic stories and business models and philanthropic adventures that there is. It's so counter to the typical way that one, if we're talking about school and back to the main word here of the conversation, belonging. But this young guy, and he said, I had no friends, nobody talked to me, da 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 da. But he just was interested in this one thing and he kept pursuing and pursuing and pursuing it. And all these years later, it's turned into something where he's got belonging on steroids.
Sometimes it's like investing in a stock portfolio. You have to wait a little while before you get that sense of belonging. How do you think he stayed in there through all that adversity?
Because I don't think he had anything. That's a great advantage. For example, I brought up the wealthy kids that they want me to come meet and tell them how to spend their billions they will inherit. That's an entirely different mindset. Some people, if they have nothing, they will convince themselves they can't do anything because they have nothing. Other people that have nothing will say, oh my gosh, I can't really fall down any farther. I've got nothing. I think you and I would probably agree, and I think this is true, is that, of course, yes, some people that walk into massive family money can go on to make some dent in society. JFK would be one. But other people, often they might go the wrong direction. Me personally, if I was betting on somebody to find belonging, I think that person that has very little, but a lot of drive and some sense of purpose, I'd love to bet on them over somebody who's just got lots of bucks to spend.
What your comment makes me think of is this point that a lot of these things that we describe as traits, like drive, like ability, willpower, I see more as strategies or mindsets. I think that there's a perverse bias in which we are forever attributing outcomes in people's lives to these internal dispositions, virtue, character inside of them. And we neglect the situations that they are either in or that they construct for themselves behind the eyes. One of the things that emerges in looking at people with high drive or a lot of willpower, especially in adverse circumstances, is what they really are often doing is they're reconstruing their situations in ways that keep them going. To take one well-used example, people who persist through frustration, as Carol Dweck showed in some of her seminal research, often are construing the adversity, a failure on a test, in a very different way from the people who give up. The people who hang in there are more likely to see the situation as an opportunity to learn, to improve their intelligence, whereas the people who give up see the situation as a referendum on who they are. They just cease and desist. It turns out, though, that you can shape that growth mindset through situations, the situations people are in. You can cultivate it and turn one of those students who gives up in the face of frustration into a student or an employee who persists. I just think there's this way in which we think about personality as almost like a gas tank that's either high or low. How much grit do they have? How much drive do they have? Is the tank high or low? And I think maybe that's to some degree true. But in addition, a lot of what we take to be virtues are, in fact, chronic differences in the way people are seeing the situations they're in, which can be taught.
This young guy that I just brought up, Mr. Beast, he might not have known what he was doing was a strategy. He does now, which is, he's like, look, if you want to be the next YouTuber like me, it took me 10 years. I just got started at age 11. So I was able to build up these calluses, so to speak. That's an important thing from an example like that is strategy. He didn't know it was a strategy, but it was a strategy.
And he loved what he did. That always helps. That always helps. You get that little dopamine blast for doing something you love, even if you're not getting a lot of money for it. It just is something that keeps you in the game. Reward is good, but it doesn't have to be tangible reward. It could be the reward you feel from doing something aligned with your values.
Geoffrey, I could keep you forever. We could keep talking about stuff. The name of the book, Belonging, The Science of Creating Connection and Bridging Divides. I've just touched on some big picture topics here. People will have to go dive in and dive deep, and I know you do that in your work. A lot more, as you said, a toolkit, ways to jump in and try and navigate the various big pictures that you and I have talked about. But this is the important stuff, in my humble opinion. This kind of topic, this kind of conversation is important. So maybe we've said something today, some nugget that inspired somebody to either check out the book or change the path or readjust their mindset. Anything we could possibly do, hopefully.
Thank you so much. I do think these conversations are like the ripples of a pebble dropped in a pond. You never know where it can go.
Did I surprise you on where I went today? Did you know what to expect necessarily?
No, that was great. I love that, Michael. That was really great. That was the best one I've done. I really enjoyed that. You're a great interviewer. I really appreciate that. Thoughtful.
I will take the compliment. Thank you very much. This is so fun for me. I'm 8,000 miles away from you. I went to George Mason. I went to Florida State, undergrad and grad school. I didn't get a chance to go to all the cool places, but I get a chance to talk to all these cool professors now, all you folks that have done all this interesting research. When I finish a conversation like this, I'm sure you feel the same way, I'm worn out. That's the feeling that people might not understand, that when you go down this path, finding a sense of purpose, finding some sense of belonging, it's something different. It's mental, it's physical, it's fantastic.
It's kind of like a relationship. It's like, man, it can be great, but it can be kind of grueling at the same time.
Is there a website you'd like to send people to? They can find you online, your college site, but is there a place you want to send people?
So they can go to just my name, Geoffrey L. Cohen, but no periods, just my name, GeoffreyLCohen, as it's spelled in the book, .com.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Michael. I'll keep listening to you with great interest. I really enjoyed it.
And keep me posted on future books for sure.
I will. Thanks so much, man.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.